So what I'll do is I'll go through the deck that we have presently introducing the company. We're framing the term Unified Space Mission Management Platform is fundamentally what we're about. And I do want to emphasize basically the market opportunity presently. Over the past 4 years, over $424 billion has been invested in the space economy, the new space economy. And it continues to grow. There was a report that just came out yesterday from Deloitte of all the various sectors, especially with respect to investment. This new space economy continues to grow, presently at about a 9% clip. So what our thesis is that what's missing in the growth of this industry is the missing link, if you will, is mission management. And the way to best describe that is with the explosion of these new companies with these innovative business models and innovative payloads, that their core competency is getting to space fast. They're venture-backed typically, and these companies don't need to be spending time figuring out how to ideate, design, and then ultimately maintain their missions in orbit. That is something that is redundant is probably the wrong word, but is basically a process that is the same no matter what the companies are. And it's expensive. Presently, it requires data scientists and astrodynamicists, which are difficult to obtain these days in these markets with the growth. And the methods that they have to employ are typically bespoke processes, their legacy tools, their C++ libraries that you can only access through command lines. And basically what we've done is we've created a platform that integrates these bespoke processes, creates an interface that doesn't require scientists to basically create the ideation and design of constellations and ultimately maintain their orbits. And the lower left side, we're basically trying to frame, the magnitude of the opportunity here in mission costs. So on the lower left is the LEO CubeSat. These are the smallest satellite, if you will. But typically their mission life cycle cost is at a minimum $5 million. And you just go through up to the upper right to something such as a lunar small sat or a Mars orbiter, and you're looking at numbers of $75 million or $300 million for mission costs. And this is per mission. A lot of these companies are continually iterating and replicating their missions over a period of time. There's a finite life relative to a mission for obvious reasons of gravity, et cetera. And this diagram here is simply to say, presently, relatively speaking, what is the cost for ideation and design and mission operations? And typically, it takes 5 FTEs, 2 or 3 years to do ideation and design. With our systems, we're talking about 2 to 3 FTEs and getting to space in less than a year. And in some instances, we're doing it in months with certain customers. And mission operations is an incredibly intensive process. Just to get to space, to do your scheduling and planning is 3 FTEs for 18 months. And then over the lifetime of mission, in minimum 26 FTEs. And what we're doing in our platform is we're automating many of these processes. And it's 1 FTE for 3 months to get flight ready, and then to operate is a fraction of the 26 FTEs. So what we're doing is basically democratizing, if you will, the processes of mission planning and operations. So here's on the right is a schematic diagram of what the platform is. On the lower part on the right is the acronyms of the various systems, the bespoke systems, that we have a unique license with Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Monty, Malto, et cetera. We've also licensed technology of GMAT from NASA. And we built an abstraction layer in the platform in the back end to extract from these C++ libraries that typically are access only through command lines, and bring those up into a data layer that is our own custom data, which is about users, telemetry, the payload, simulations. And this is all manifest in a cloud-based platform that is easy to use, which obviates the necessity for having all these very sophisticated scientists who are hard to acquire. We have built an insurmountable first mover advantage. And as I mentioned before, Caltech is an equity partner in the platform and the company. So I'm going to go through 3 slides presently of the 3 major components of the platform. And the first one is the ideation and design. And you're looking actually one of our customers. Eternal Light is building a constellation of satellites around the moon to beam energy to facilities on the south pole of the moon. I think this is an interesting indicative of how advanced the industry is and the kinds of use cases and payloads that people are developing. And we've been instrumental with respect to them designing their systems. They're actually in the second iteration in module with respect to finalizing their constellations. The second is build and test. Maybe hard to read this through a web presentation, but on the lower left, you're looking at an interface of the various components. They're indicated schematically on the right side of this slide. That is, we have partners and libraries of all the components that make up a payload. So whether or not it's the propulsion, avionics, the batteries, the payload, the solar arrays, all of those are incorporated into the platform because they all have attributes and their values that affect ultimately how you get to space, what kind of trajectories, et cetera. And again, it's an iterative process based on the type of propulsion system. You're going to have variables that affect what the mission orbit is, and we iterate back and forth. But again, what we're doing is we're combining disparate processes to get these companies to space faster at lesser cost, because we basically automated processes that have been manually done to date. The third part is the mission operations. So this is basically when you're in orbit, the daily operations from launch to end of life. This is telemetry, ingestion and visualization, scheduling and tasking, anomaly resolution. And what we're largely doing here is we're automating processes that typically what's happened is, and I'll use Planet Labs as an example, is they had to build their own algorithms to manage all these processes, and they did it with multiple FTEs. There are in excess 26 people at full time doing that at a huge cost annually. And we're basically saying, look, this doesn't have to be in this way. We're automating the entire processes to reduce cost for these new companies.
Then Marc, I mean, what made you want to come to Continuum, and what excites you about what you guys are doing?
Based off of my introduction, like I said, I'll give a couple of examples. So Black Sky, they're large. They're primarily in the Defense Intelligence Agency. You might have seen them in the news yesterday. They won another big, huge contract from the National Reconnaissance Organization. But the preponderance of their revenues is actually not U.S. government. It's other foreign governments. And there's 2 situations that I was familiar with and participated in, and they needed to repurpose their satellites to basically get to revenue opportunities. And these are very complicated situations where they had to take into consideration their ability to download data in remote parts of the world. They had to deal with differing weather conditions because they're an optical sensor. And for them to figure out and ideate about, okay, I've got this sensor presently in orbit, or I'm about to design some additional sensors and get them into orbit. How do you take into consideration all these different variables, if you will? And what I experienced is, I'll use Ukraine as an example. When the war broke out there, huge demand for imagery, and Black Sky had a really hard time figuring out how they were going to create different orbits for satellites to get the appropriate coverage in Ukraine. It took months. And using a system such as ours, they could have reduced that time and the cost and human effort by multiple factors. And so I had that practical experience at Black Sky. And then you combine that with the acceleration of the investment in the industry, and as I mentioned before, expanding in all these different verticals and use cases. And it just seemed obvious that these people need to focus on basically getting to space, focus on their unique payloads and business models, and stop recreating the wheel over and over again. And it just that's what attracted me as an opportunity, and that's borne out to be the case.
So, Marc, I know you and Leon both went into this a little bit, showed a couple of slides about sort of the size of the market, but our experience, David's and mine, is that a market that's now several $100 billion just catches people off guard, and they're trying to figure out, like, how is that possible, that there's a $300 to $400 billion economy, space economy, that's already up and running. It's not a projection or a prediction, it's actually real. And we can, through Continuum, participate in a big and expanding part of that. So maybe some more anecdotes, examples, Marc, that you might have to offer, and then Leon, if you want to wrap something around that, I think it would be helpful to really unpack it in a little more detail.
Yeah, it may be appropriate to just talk about a company called Skybox and how that disrupted the industry. And then Leon's got some points about that. I was actually involved in Skybox when I was, they were in Menlo Park as well as Google, and I was working in Google's offices, again, as I introduced at the beginning of this seminar, doing analytics. Those analytics with Google were primarily off of US government sensors and European Space Agency sensors. And these are, these government payloads are, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, years in the making. And Skybox came along and said, look, we're going to build basically, a dorm room refrigerator sized satellite at a fraction of the cost. And we're going to, get these into orbit very quickly. And they totally disrupted the industry. And they did that because of advances in technology and that just it came upon the time when they initiated the company. And that really was, in my opinion, initiated a revolution in the industry. Planet Labs was right there with them, with the smaller CubeSat constellation. But they were sort of the leaders in the industry to basically completely upset what has typically been the domain of big governments. And it's just accelerated since then. We're seeing these innovations, like I said, eternal light. Who would have thought that, somebody's going to create a way to beam energy from sunlight to the south pole of the moon for missions? So,
excellent answer. What I'd like to just offer is, if you look back about a decade or a dozen years ago, companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, really are kind of credited with what is called, or what is referred to as, new space, and disrupting the legacy of prime contractors of Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, and so on. And that's really been the beginning of this revolution, referred to as new space. But to me, there's something very, very telling about where this new group is going. If you look at SpaceX, clearly an extremely successful company, started off clearly with launch vehicles. And that was really David against Goliath at the time. Currently still, the United Launch Alliance, which is Lockheed Martin and Boeing partnered, SpaceX went directly against the giants in the launch vehicle business. And they basically disrupted the launch vehicle business with a lot of help from the US government in terms of billions of dollars in contract. But the launch vehicle business, in that pie chart of 400 and something billion, is a small fraction of that pie. Very small, maybe 2% of that, 2 to 3% globally of the business. And it's very smart for SpaceX to invest in Starlink. Why? Because broadband communications is where the big money is. So when you look at these services enabled by space, whether it's observation, Earth observation, or communication bandwidth, or the emerging sectors of in-space manufacturing and commercial real estate, those are all emerging markets. But for SpaceX to now invest in thousands of satellites with its own launch vehicles, deploying them into space, is really going where the money is. And it's not in the launch vehicle business. Certainly there's viable business, but it's a small fraction of the big business, which is in the services, namely communications and Earth observations, but there's many other emerging fields, whether it's enabling smart agriculture or healthcare or many other fields. The data downlink is the data services is where the huge money is in that pie chart.